Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Bryan McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to talk about a pretty heated topic about cars, subscriptions, and microtransactions. And BMW's recently announced that they will be charging monthly for features such as heated steering wheels and seats. This announcement has caused a lot of tension in the automotive community. So let's talk about it. Good morning, Dee. How are you doing? Did you catch my joke in the intro?
I did. I chose not to respond to it.
Was it bad? Was it bad? I thought it was pretty good when I wrote it.
Well, you can tell that you were a father because it was a hardcore dad joke.
I know. I liked it though. I was as I was writing it, I was like giggling all by myself.
Yeah, well, there you go. As long as you are entertained.
Yep. Hey, so this is a really interesting topic. You had sent me an article about this, and it got me all excited because I have multiple friends that have discussed this topic with me ever since the announcement was made by BMW, and we'll get into that in a second. The automotive industry is changing, and some of these changes are causing some tension and frustration and anger. So let me explain for everybody what's going on and why Dee and I are talking about this today. So BMW is adding a subscription model in some countries for things like heated seats, which they want to charge $18 a month for, and microtransactions for features such as automatic high beams and adaptive cruise control. Car owners already have all the necessary components, but BMW has put a software block on those features that buyers have to pay to remove. Examples are the heating steering wheels, which is $12 a month, camera recording for $235 for unlimited use, and Icon Sound Sports Package for $117. Before we get into more details about that, so we read about this stuff on The Verge. They posted it and had a great article kind of discussing it. So, Dee, what are your thoughts on this stuff initially, like the way this is going? And we can kind of see why they're doing this.
Well, yeah, it's a way for them to increase their revenue. But looking at it from I've got my now 9-year-old car with heated seats out there that doesn't require any kind of software regulation in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the issues with this is number one, I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who is into gaming, and microtransactions and a lot of software as a service when it comes to gaming has been a huge issue. It's to the point where legislators in Europe and even in the United States have looked at all right, this needs to be regulated because some unethical things are happening here,
Mm-hmm.
and some forms of microtransactions, such as randomized rewards in the form of what's called loot boxes are, I believe, illegal in some countries. And I believe in Europe also because it's been treated as a form of gambling. The issue when it comes to some of these implementations, especially the heated steering wheels and heated seats, are you are already paying for a vehicle that has the hardware built into it. So you're already paying for the hardware. They have to develop new software
Mm-hmm.
to control something that was previously not software controlled or limited in order to block the use of that. So you're essentially paying for software in order to block your use of a piece of hardware that you have acquired. And then you have to pay more on a regular basis to unblock it. So you're already paying for something. You're paying additional in order to access something that you've already paid for, which to a certain extent is what has happened in the games industry, where you're paying full price for a piece of software, like a piece of media, and then you're paying additional in order to access things that should
Mm-hmm.
be available previously. And there's precedent for it being available out of the box to begin with.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second and clarify. So basically, what BMW is doing is it's adding all the hardware features during production. So it's
Mhm.
producing a car, and it has all these potential hardware features in them: the high beams, the heated seats, the heated steering wheel, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Then what they're doing is they're actually coding software that blocks the use of those particular features, and then you have to pay to unblock them to enable that feature and pay a monthly fee in order to do so. Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second here. Okay.
Mhm.
Because I'm just thinking about the models. I'm not thinking about how upset everyone is right now. So from a manufacturing perspective, and I proposed this with a good friend of ours who we were trying to get on the podcast today, but he was unavailable, and he gave me some good insights that I might bring up here. Is that from a manufacturing perspective, the idea that you could build one car with everything in it, but offer that same car for three different prices seems like an intelligent financial decision from a manufacturing standpoint. Because you're like, okay, I have this particular sedan, it has a variety of colors or whatever, but it has all these particular hardware features built into it. I have customers that want to pay 30,000, customers that want to pay 50,000, customers that are willing to pay 70,000. And then I stack the features accordingly and I enable them with software for each vehicle. Okay, so from a theoretical standpoint, you would look at that and say, wow, that's great. You can just produce one type of car. You don't have to produce three different types of cars at different price points, right? I know that there are issues with that, but tell me what your thoughts are from a model perspective and a manufacturing perspective of why that would be a problem or
Well,
why
I'm
that's
aware
not a
of
great
them
idea.
actually doing something like that, where they're actually producing one model and then selling them at different levels and
Hmm.
just blocking off access to features. I believe Tesla has some things where Tesla where software services or software applications are expandable through purchases, but I don't know of any situations in which things like adaptive traction control is just installed on the car that
Uh,
they're and just locking it behind software.
So this is about the theory. So this is kind of like an idea of where people kind of think this will go and why we're seeing a little bit of this kind of happen right now as the industry is a way of kind of like figuring out manufacturing costs versus user need and that kind of stuff. Do you think
Well,
that that kind of model is a bad idea?
I don't see what the advantage is, honestly. I mean, these cars and hardware systems are designed to be modular, so it's already designed in order to accept, a new controlling mechanism for, ABS brakes or something like that. So
Okay.
it's just a different SKU being installed into it. So it doesn't make sense in order to install the more expensive hardware into something that you're going to sell for a lower price, that you're just decreasing your margins and not necessarily streamlining too much your production model. So I don't see why somebody would do that from a manufacturing standpoint.
Uh-huh.
It would be more like, I could see it if it was, different versions within like a small amount of variation as far as price.
Okay.
But at that point, it's the effect on your margins probably not even necessarily worth it. It
Well,
would
so
make
one of the
more
things that
sense in
our
order to.
yeah, one of the things that our friend had mentioned to me is he said it seems extremely wasteful. He's like, so you have, let's say, this large, this bell curve, right? And the majority of people pick the car that's in the middle, right? So you basically have installed hardware. You've gone out and actually physically like mined, whatever the components are for lithium or, all these different things, and you're installing them on a
Mhm.
vehicle and they never get used. Right. So those
Yeah.
components will never get used because they've never been software enabled because the person can't afford it. So it's a very wasteful thing to do. You have a battery that can go 400 miles, but you're basically limiting it down to 250 because they only paid a certain amount. So you have this capable battery that's sitting there when you could have produced just a smaller battery to put in the vehicle, right? So I think there's a little bit of debate on how to best manufacture, especially when we're mixing digital and physical hardware, and things are getting more and more complex, and there's more and more software enabled on these vehicles than there were 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'm unaware of exactly what's going on from a manufacturing standpoint for them. It doesn't necessarily make sense in order for them to pay for a 400. Now, if you can unlock it with software, maybe you're still ultimately the consumer is paying for a 400-mile capacity battery, and then they're being limited by that because the
Yeah.
way these typically work, we know this having worked on hardware and software and worked on pricing, is that you figure out what your cost to manufacture is, and then you ensure that your pricing is a certain amount above that, and then anything beyond that is based on what the consumer is willing to pay, not on your
Hmm.
cost to manufacture. So if, at
Yeah.
that point, if you can reduce your cost to manufacture, that's fine. You reduce your cost to manufacture. Your pricing for the vehicle doesn't change just because you reduce the cost to manufacture. and vice versa. If the cost of manufacture increases, the decision is not necessarily to increase pricing in response to that. You increase pricing in response to the consumer's willingness to pay more.
Yeah.
But if the two get out of alignment and the cost of manufacture reaches the point where you can't maintain your margins in order to meet that price that the consumer is willing to pay, you stop producing the vehicle and you start designing something new.
Mhm. Yeah. And the other component to this too is the fact that, like, as someone who's, let's say, purchasing the highest end model, how do you feel that the even the lowest end model has all the same hardware features on it, but yet you're paying so much more for it, right? It's like a weird, like, mental thing. Like, we see this a lot because you and I study psychology and stuff like that, where people go, "Well, wait a minute, I could buy the exact same car for $20,000 less. I just have to find someone who's willing to that can hack it for me so I can get all my features enabled." Right? It starts to create these weird conversations in people's heads when they know that they're not that the value is basically being gated rather than the value was provided. Do you know what I
Maybe
mean?
it definitely kind of degrades the value of the high end and kind of raises questions about the value of the low end. I imagine a lot of people who are buying the absolute top end of a vehicle like a BMW is less concerned about kind of the value they're getting, and it's more about kind of the experience of ownership and kind of even the social aspects of that, of just showing off their awesome, $120,000 BMW.
Mhm.
So I don't know how much they are splitting hairs about like the technical aspects of what's in their vehicle, because if that was the case, they wouldn't be spending $120,000 on a BMW anyway. They'd
Yeah.
probably be spending like $50,000 or $60,000 on a Lancer Evolution or something like that that has essentially the same performance for half the price.
Yeah, well, you said something on there that caught my attention, which you said the word ownership. And I've been thinking about this a lot and I wanted to see how you thought about it. So, how do you feel when you quote unquote own something, but you kind of don't these days, right? So, you buy a car, you buy an old VW bus or something, right? And they give you a pink slip and
Yeah.
it's like yours and it's in the garage, it's yours and all that stuff. You buy a newer car these days and it's like you own it, but then they can turn things remotely on and off and that kind of stuff. Does that cause any issues for you? Do you feel like you actually don't own the car because you're kind of slightly have to, like, get permission for certain things, or they can do things to the car without, let's say, asking, like pushing updates and stuff like that. Do you have any issues with that?
Well, it depends on what it is. I have less of an issue with it when it's a video game system than I do if it's a car, because when it comes to a car, there's a lot of different things at play. There's safety issues at play. What if you're driving with your child and they decide that they're going to push an update while you're driving that breaks your brakes?
Well,
What if
I
they
mean, do you think that would
decide?
really happen though? I mean, isn't that something that they would know to push while the car is, disable the car first and say this car cannot be driven right now, an update is in progress or something?
I don't have any control over this because I don't have ownership over the software process.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've seen worse things happen. We've seen things where, for example, the Tesla cars where they caught on fire and the car doors locked and they had to dig around in like some hidden base plate for a manual car release.
Yeah.
Um, there there's no telling necessarily how well any of these software updates or update systems are going to be implemented, and if they are, how consistent they're going to be across manufacturers. Now, even
Hmm.
aside from the safety issue of updating while driving, how do you know that you're not going to be on a road trip somewhere, stop in a motel in the middle of frontier land in Montana or Utah or Nevada, which we've done before, and you go out to start your car the next day, and I was like, oh, you've got an issue in place. You can't start your car. Your car has been bricked. You've got a red ring of death, or you have to pay some substantial amount from some motel where there isn't even a gas station around for 50 miles, and you can't move your car. Ownership is ultimately about control.
Yeah.
So ownership is ultimately about the ability to take actions with the item under your control. Whoever owns it has control over what happens with it. So now with this weird kind of, and it's to some extent I blame Apple for this because they were doing this back in the day where it's like, all right, well, you don't really own your phone, and if you do anything that breaks your terms of services, we have the right to break your phone and things like that. Not
Yep.
that they're the only ones to do that, but they were the high profile first ones that I can think of. Now imagine they do that with cars and they decide that you've done something with your car that is against their terms of services and they're going to brick your car. And who knows, who cares where you are or what you're doing when you do it. Maybe, hopefully, you're not driving. Hopefully, you're at home. Hopefully, you're not on a trip somewhere. And that's just the deal with it. So there, beyond that, there's still just this what's considered anti-consumer aspect of the microtransactions on something that you've already paid for. That
Hmm.
is a huge issue in gaming, and we've seen things like this where people have bought the game and then 2 weeks later they're deleted from their inventory by the publisher or by
Hmm.
the manufacturer. This has happened recently with some games.
Yeah, and actually, when I was talking to our friend about the car stuff, he also mentioned the same one you're talking about in the gaming industry of just like
Mm-hmm.
you buy something and then it's gone, right? And you're like, well, wait a minute, I paid for
Yeah.
that, right? And so there's a lot of questions there. So let's take a pause for a second here, and I want to ask you a couple questions before I bring up some data. Basically, a survey was conducted, and this was also in The Verge. I want to be clear, by Cox Automotive, and I had actually went and looked at the survey itself and researched it. What are you okay with paying for as a microtransaction, an update, a feature, whatever you want to talk about in your car versus what you're not willing to pay for? So clearly, from our discussion, you think it's not a good deal to have to pay $18 a month for heated seats, or
Oh,
$12 a month for a heated
yeah.
steering wheel. Okay, so let's put that one to the side because I know that you're not interested in that. But when you do
Mm-hmm.
think about the context of paying for software updates, or software features or new things for your car, what seems reasonable that you would be willing to pay for versus what would be completely not reasonable?
So we've already kind of again we have precedent over the past I don't know 10 plus years in video games of what has been accepted by that community, and I tend to agree with that community about what is acceptable to be purchased through microtransactions or even a subscription than what wouldn't be. And one of the major things is anything functional should be essentially included with the price of the vehicle. So anything as far as driving from place to place, if there's a navigation system, things like that should be included. Anything that's related to hardware should be included with the price of the vehicle because you're already receiving the hardware. It's included in the price of your purchase.
Okay.
What has worked well for games like Fortnite, it has been anything cosmetic is fair game. So it
Okay.
doesn't change the functionality of the hardware in any way or the software, but it is changing the looks of things. So if you could have like an adaptive like paint or Windows system or things like that, like you can adaptively change the tint or the color of the vehicle, then that's something that you can download and pay, and there'll be microtransactions. So if you basically reskinning your car, I mean, we already see this in car games where you can pay a microtransaction in order to
Hmm.
buy a new paint job for your car. If you can do that electronically, that's fantastic. If you can
Yeah.
do things like that in order for your internal entertainment system, that's fine. If it is a new software update for the entertainment system or something like the Icon Sounds sports package, which
Hmm.
BMW is charging $117 for, what that basically does is it is playing car sounds through your stereo while you're driving, so you can hear your
Yep.
engine revving and things like that. That's fine. Now, if someone wants to pay for something for that, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. The challenge that we have when we're deciding what is the fair game and what is not is that the manufacturers, once they get down this road, they get into a position where it might not be up to them. It They might get into a position where their stockholders are looking at it and saying, you know, you could increase the stock price by doing these things, even though the consumers hate it, and you have a legal financial responsibility to increase the stock price. So we're going to sue you and force you to implement this.
Yeah. I mean, it gets complicated really quick.
Yeah.
I will say, I agree with you pretty much on your assessment of that. I was thinking about it the other day because you know how Tesla added gaming inside of their screens, so you can like play video
Hmm.
games in the car and that kind of stuff. Like I see all that as just added features, right? Like it has nothing to do
Sure.
with me driving my car. So I'm like, hey, if I want to pay, let's say, I don't know how much it costs, but let's say it's $20 a month or something like that for games. It's like that's fine, like you can pay for those features. We've done these collaborative exercises with users before, D. We have seen
Yep.
where we outline things like, hey, what are you willing to pay for, not willing to pay for, which features are most important to you, which ones should be standard, that kind of stuff. And it's pretty clear, like when you start to work with users, that they kind of fall into a pretty general category. Now, you're not going to make everybody super happy all the time, but if you can
Hmm.
get the majority of your users stoked about what comes with the vehicle versus what are the added features you can purchase later, you really don't run into these issues that BMW is having right now with this press release, right? It's like, how did this
Yeah.
not get tested first, right? So I want to go back to this Cox Automotive survey that was conducted. So they did this with 217 people who intended to buy a new car in the next 2 years. Only 25% said they'd be willing to pay a monthly or annual fee to unlock features in their vehicle, while the
Hmm.
remaining 75% said no thanks. Now, isn't that kind of a common thing that people would say? Meaning, because we're not used to doing this model, we're not used to buying things, software updates in our cars and things like that, that we immediately go to like, oh, no, 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 I would never do that.
Well,
Right?
I think not. I haven't seen this survey,
Uh huh.
but you typically, if you're just going to ask people, like, what do you think about paying for this in this way, you're going to
Yeah,
have a little bit of a hard time. You actually have to offer up specific examples of you're paying
exactly.
for this, this, and this in order for them to evaluate those things.
Yeah, because I
I
feel like
think
most
that,
people would respond this way. I would respond this way of like, no, I
yeah,
don't want to pay for extra stuff. You should be updating my car for me to make me happy so I have a good user
yeah.
experience and buy another car from you.
Yeah. So imagine, for example, that you have I'll also point out that whoever is buying these new cars, they almost certainly have experience with monthly and annual subscriptions for things like everybody does now. So
For
now it's
sure.
extending that to a car, and it kind of creates this sense of fragmentation. So my car experience is going to be I don't know what until I know what subscriptions I'm going to pay for. And
Hmm.
people are getting subscription fatigue. I'm seeing advertisements for things like Mint or other stuff. It was like, do you know how much you're paying for in subscriptions? And I think it's hurting already the streaming video marketplace, video services. We're seeing people like Netflix start to lose users.
Yeah.
And I think it's affecting other media like music. And I think if they do this, then it's going to affect everybody because at the end of the day, that consumer is sitting at home and thinking to themselves, "This is how much I'm paying in subscriptions." They're not necessarily looking at parsing it out and saying like, "This is what I'm paying for car subscription and that subscription and that subscription." They're just thinking, "All right, this is how much money is coming out of my pocket every month for subscriptions, and if it's too high, then I need to look for ways in order to cut the fat."
Hey, subscription creep happens to the best of us. I mean, there are things that I've got, that were $10 a month or $3 a month or
Yeah,
five, and you kind of forget, and they're just like charging, 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 and then later you're like, dude, I haven't even used that in like a year, right? And I'll give you a good example of that. Our business credit card needed to be updated. The company that makes our business credit card actually sent me a note and said, "Oh, here's all the subscriptions you're going to need to update based on this new card because it's been like 4 years or whatever." And it
yeah,
was a really long list. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to have to go through these and make sure we still need those.
right. That's your
Right.
first thought is when you're presented with a list of subscriptions. It's like I believe I can get away with not paying for some of these because I don't use them enough.
Yeah, and it all comes down to value, right? Is like at the end of the
Hmm.
day, a subscription is still a product, right? So if you
Yeah,
love it and use it, like I mean, I know this people are tired of hearing us say how much we love Disney Plus, but like I pay for Disney Plus and I have no problems paying for it. I just watched Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was amazing. I loved it. It was awesome. I walked away each night going, man, that was so good, right? So I don't mind paying for that. But if I'm paying for things like I'm not even gonna give an example because I don't need to like bash any companies or whatever. But like there's certain things that I do pay for that I kind of don't want to pay for. And the second I have the opportunity to not do that, I'll cut it. Right. So let's go back to this survey because there's another piece of
Hmm.
information here I thought was really awesome. And it ties
Yeah.
into the way we've done things. Of those 25% that don't mind a subscription with their vehicle, the features they'd be willing to pay an annual and monthly fee basically fell into three buckets. Safety features, of course, right? If it was tied to it, but like we talked about, safety features
Well,
should
I
not
have
not
something
be
to
tied
say
to it.
about the safety features for sure.
Yeah, hold on a second. Vehicle performance and then comfort. So I, this is hard for me to believe. I mean, I understand the way surveys work because we write them and that kind of stuff. We just ask people. You don't have a lot of context behind it. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when people see a survey and they say, "What would you be willing to pay for?" Of course, they're going to say stuff like, safety and performance and that kind of stuff because they want to have a good experience with their vehicle. But just like
Yeah.
you had said to me earlier, which is like with safety in particular, you should never ever be gated on safety. Like you should give
Now,
the best safety, top safety features you can possibly give for any vehicle you sell, just because it's the right thing to do.
yeah, if you ever come across a vehicle manufacturer of any kind who is wants to upcharge you for a software unlock of a safety feature,
Mhm.
walk away completely. There, you do not want. I mean, it's one thing if you're paying for a piece of hardware that's going to be installed in your vehicle that wouldn't be installed otherwise, because that is a hardware install. It's the For a software install, the cost for them in order to provide that software install to you or to unlock a software unlock is so minimal that it should absolutely included with it. And if they are locking that, if they're making your vehicle less safe in order to charge you some kind of a subscription fee, you want nothing to do with that company at all. That is a company who's looking in order to decrease your safety in order to be able to sell you services.
Yeah, so one of the things that they noted is that automakers have agreed that automatic emergency braking, for example, will be standard in new vehicles starting this year. So I think
Yeah,
things like safety, I don't think that's ever going to roll out, honestly, completely. I can understand if there was something associated with like a free dashboard cam or something. I don't know that not everybody, most people don't have anyways, or something like that that's tied to it, but definitely not with automatic emergency braking or anything related to that. I feel like that should just be like required. um,
that I mean, there should be legislation behind that. Honestly, there should be. It's that level of implementation. I mean, thankfully, the Volvo, when they invented seatbelts, they didn't charge anybody in order to use seatbelts. Right? They
mhm.
had the patent. They made it open use for everybody. If there is a software based collision avoidance system, it should be essentially required. There should not be a patent around that. And if it is, it should be all right. Well, you cannot enforce exclusivity on this patent. You will receive a royalty for it, but that's it. This needs, if it increases the safety of consumers, especially, there, so many people are dying out on the road, then it just needs to be standard.
It's
It's
kind of like backup
required.
cameras, right? I believe that those are required now. All new vehicles have to
Yeah.
provide you with a backup camera, right? Because
Yeah.
they realize
It is required
how
now.
paramount they are to safety of kids and everything. And then the other one was
Mhm.
vehicle performance, which is weird to me, right? It's like extra torque, horsepower.
Well, I mean,
I
the two are pretty related between safety features and vehicle performance, right? So I
Yeah.
imagine extra torque or horsepower, maybe not, depending on your situation. When you're looking at performance specifications for a vehicle, a lot of those are your braking ability, right? How quickly you can bring your vehicle to a stop. That's a performance feature. There are things like the amount of kind of body roll that you'll have, or tip over functionality if you're in a turn. Those are performance features. So when it comes to performance features, it does become there is some potential overlap with safety features.
You know which one I would pay for? I would actually pay like probably hundreds of dollars to get would be the changing of your the color of your car with one button push.
Yeah.
If I had a car for 3 years and then they were like, "Hey, guess what? We have," I think you said it was called like adaptive coloring or something for cars. I'm not familiar with it, but like that new feature, and they're like, "Pick a color," and I pick it, and suddenly the car instantly changes that color. I'd pay like $300
Hmm.
probably to do that. As a one-time change fee, like as a microtransaction, if they're like, "Hey, for $300, you want to change the color of your car?" I'd be like,
Well,
"Yeah, it's almost like getting a new car."
that's not a microtransaction at that point. That's just a transaction.
That's just a transaction, I know.
that might be a
But
that might be a macro transaction. But yeah, I mean, I would absolutely would. I mean, one of the reasons why I choose, and I think a lot of people choose more neutral car colors, is because I'm like, I've got to live with this every day. And if I
yep.
don't, then I'm like, oh, cool. Let's throw something fun on from time to time. And if I need it to be more serious or something, you don't want your crazy neon green vehicle with like pinstripes and like eagles flying to be on your car when you're going to a funeral or something, right? But you can have that. You can totally have something fun and crazy if you can adapt. If you have adaptive paint that can change.
Yeah. And Tesla, they pioneered this model of like the over the air feature updates and stuff like that. And they've done a pretty good job. I haven't seen anything from them about reducing safety or anything like that. But here's what did happen when they started doing that, and other companies started following and jumping into this space of creating these, like, I always call them like half iPhone, half car kind of vehicles. It was reported that GM earned almost 2 billion in subscription services just last year alone, with the goal of approximately 25 billion by the end of the decade.
Mm-hmm.
That means I look at General Motors as basically being a SaaS company.
By the end of the day, well, it depends on how that relates to their hardware sales, right? I mean, what
Yeah.
proportion is it? So I think that $2 billion in subscription services is probably a small proportion of their overall business. I think it for GM, I believe, and I could be wrong here, that they're mostly selling like OnStar subscriptions.
Correct.
Um, and there's probably selling some kind of like entertainment software downloads, some things like that. So you can, or other connectivity, so the kids can watch a movie while they're in the back seat of their Tahoe or something.
Yeah.
Um, that seems perfectly reasonable, and it's a great way for a company like BMW to have these software transactions and content downloads that aren't related to hardware performance or things like that. There's a lot of
Mhm.
opportunity for them. It doesn't mean taking a 15-year-old hardware feature and locking it behind a software block.
Yeah. But what about things like this? Okay, let's say you go and you purchase a car and it has like an infotainment system, and that infotainment system, let's say you hold on to your car for 10 years, right? Which is not
Mm-hmm.
uncommon. And you're on year 8 and your infotainment system is just junk, right? Like I can give you examples of this, but I won't because I don't want to be rude. But anyway, so it just doesn't work very well. And they were like, oh, okay, well, you can, plug in your car or use our over the air feature, or something like that, and update the infotainment system. Do you think that you should have to pay for that? Or do you feel like that should just be an added feature to kind of like solidify the quality of a brand?
I mean, I wouldn't charge for it. I would continue to support hardware like that, software hardware integrations like that, at least at a minimum level, in order to keep them running. Now, there might be a premium experience associated with that, like I don't know, maybe you want Morgan Freeman to be providing your turn by turn directions, or
Yeah.
Samuel L. Jackson's a popular one. Um, that I think is fair game to charge people for. But if it's just all right, well your car is now non supported, I think that's an issue unless you pay for it.
Yeah.
That would make me not want to buy that vehicle.
Yeah. But how is that any different than back in the old days when we were like, oh man, this radio is terrible? And then we would just go over to, you know, Good Guys or Best Buy or something like that. And you buy a brand new radio, pay 300 or 400 bucks for it, and then either have it installed or install it yourself. I mean, you still had to pay to upgrade that entertainment system. The difference in this one is they were just going to push it for you or give you something to download it, and update it. That you
Yeah, well
shouldn't have to pay
that's
for it.
that's the difference. That's the difference between a hardware failure and a software failure.
Yeah.
If it's software failure, then that can be maintained. That is a software and engineering team that's working on bug fixes for everything. That is just pushing out an update for one more piece of hardware,
But
and
I feel like
if
this is a
it's 10 years
mentality.
old, they know it pretty well.
This is a mentality
What's
shift
that?
though, D. It's like a mentality shift though, because it's like we're older, right? And
Hmm.
a lot of people that we talk to and do researchers that are younger, they seem to be more malleable and comfortable with this idea of paying for software updates and paying for things like that. I mean, they get
Hmm.
frustrated definitely in certain categories for sure, like you've described, but they seem more comfortable with that. Where we're kind of like, nah, no, like you should be
Yeah.
just continuing to improve my experience. So is it just that you and I, having this conversation right now are looking at this and going like, yeah, that doesn't seem reasonable and that doesn't seem like a good experience
Yeah.
to design for your customer? Or is it that we're kind of living in the old ages here and we need to kind of like step up and start thinking like a younger person?
No, I think this is based on both experiences that we've had and experiences that we've observed, right?
Yeah.
So I've had an older car before where the entertainment system didn't work anymore. I didn't necessarily go out and say, I've had a BMW before
Hmm.
and the elements of the entertainment system didn't quite work. And I didn't go out and, BMW was selling like, hey, you can buy this other hardware and have it installed and it'll cost you this much. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to, use workarounds. And
Yeah.
that's the reality is that if you're not providing the software and keeping it maintained in order for like an infotainment system to work, then people are just going to turn to their phones and other devices in order to fill the gap. The, that's just saying that they're not going to pay for that necessarily. Some people will. Uh, there's always going to, law of large numbers. 75% won't, 25% will. Then you're going to get some people that will. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily good business.
Yeah. Well, what about the elephant in the room here, which is the one that everybody loves to talk about, which hasn't emerged yet? And every 5 years, we say it'll be in about 5 years, which is the ability to push a software update and make your vehicle an autonomous vehicle, so you don't have to drive it yourself. If that became possible, and we know that takes a tremendous amount of software development in order to make it safe and possible and all that kind of stuff, if that were to be an option, do you feel like that should be something that's standard and provided once it's developed, or do you think people should have to pay for it? Because remember, the data does indicate that if we could get autonomous driving functional properly, it would be safer than a human driving
Yeah.
the car.
Well, here's the reality: is that you cannot just take a car that was made in like 1995 and push a software update and make it autonomous.
No.
It doesn't have the hardware required in order to do that. You need sensors, you need control systems. You basically need all of the hardware already built into it. So, to the extent that the autonomous driving system might include collision avoidance, I think that is going to have to be required by law to be available, and to also have a disable feature in order in case that is malfunctioning. But otherwise, you're building in the autonomous capability, but not providing the autonomous capability. Then it's one of those things where it's. I don't think people will buy those vehicles without it getting the autonomous capability.
Hmm.
So because they're paying for things that they're not getting. So it is one of the things where I think there will be a dividing line. Either you pay for an autonomous vehicle and you get the autonomous functioning software, or you don't. And one thing that I don't think you can do is necessarily make the autonomous driving a subscription service, because what happens if it's dependent upon regular updates or some kind of a constant connection? What happens when you lose connection? What happens when you don't get the updates? What happens if the
Yeah.
update breaks the vehicle? Because that's what happens all the time with updates, right? You fix one bug and it creates three others.
Yep.
It has to be something that is a viable product out of the box and doesn't require any updates in order to function.
Yeah. We've been waiting for a long time, just
Yeah.
like we've been waiting for aliens to visit us and other things that take a long time. No, another question I have is something I've been thinking about. The other day, I realized that Netflix and a couple other services are very user dependent, not household dependent. So they're like, who's the user on this platform? Even Alexa
Yeah.
does that. They're like, who is this? Is this Brian or is this your son? That kind of stuff. Do you feel like we're going to get to a point where you hop in a car and the car's like, who is this? And you're like, Demetrius. And then everything adjusts to that. And even some of the things that you pay for are tied to your credit card and not tied to the car, but actually tied to the user.
I think so. I think it makes sense when you have a profile that adapts to it. I've actually been waiting for that for computers for a very long time.
Yeah.
So you imagine, there's a difference between using one computer and another. So you go to, for example, a library, and you can VPN to your normal computer.
Yep.
But if your data and your settings are, and even including like your wallpaper and stuff for your computer is all available within a cloud, and you walk up to a computer, maybe you use your sign in or something like that that you do for your cloud account, and it just loads all of your settings, so it looks just like your normal computer at home. That I think it would be pretty normal for a car. You already have kind of saved seating like in my BMW that I used to have, and this was like a 19 no, might have been. It was a 2003, I think. But it had saved settings where you hit a button and it changed your steering wheel orientation. It changed your seats so that it would align exactly to what you were before. I don't see why that wouldn't be the case within a vehicle. In a modern vehicle, since there's already precedent for it from a design standpoint, it's just all right. You get in and you select who your user is, and it has your radio stations. It has your media. It has your favorite locations that you drive to. It has your steering wheel angle and your seating arrangement, and maybe it adjusts the pedals. Who knows? Or maybe it changes the tint on the windshield. There's all kinds of things that it could
Yeah.
do. I think that makes sense from the user experience perspective.
Well, I keep thinking that they could theoretically go a layer deeper, which would, I think, totally just irritate the user, honestly. But like if I pay for games inside of my Tesla, but then I get out of the car and my friend hops in, the games aren't available because it's the wrong profile.
Well, I don't know. That seems weird to me. Like, why is your friend driving your Tesla?
Or your family or somebody else in your family, you know what I mean?
Well,
Maybe it's
if
your wife and she
somebody
doesn't plug
like
in.
I grew up in California. I come from a car culture, so if somebody's driving my car, it's a limited edition thing. I don't necessarily want them to access everything that's associated with my car.
Yeah.
They're doing it for a specific reason. They're not doing it because they're making themselves home. I'm a little
Uh,
possessive when it comes to my cars, so it's like, yeah, I'm fine with that.
yeah. Yeah. Well, where do you think this is all going to go? I mean, what's your prediction? I mean, do you think BMW is going to backtrack because of the negative press that they've gotten because of this, or do you think they're just going to plow ahead and keep
I
moving
think they're
along with
trying it
what?
out. I think it'll be something that they might figure out. Some things are okay in order to kind of upcharge, and some things won't. There's too much money on the table for them to not upcharge for anything. But hopefully they figure it out. I think it will limit implementations in certain countries that I think it'll be ultimately will be difficult for them to implement this in Germany and the EU because they have been pretty aggressive at tapping down on microtransactions. I think it'll be a challenge in the United States. I think that some other countries might be less of a challenge. But hopefully, I imagine because there's just the economic pressures on them in order to find a way in order to get this recurring revenue for them is just too great. They're gonna have to figure out a way in order to do that, or else like their investors are going to come down on them hard. So they're gonna have to figure out a way to do this. I think that they probably will. Hopefully, it's not something like safety features or something that's built in hardware, especially something with the precedent like a heated steering wheel. Like that
Yeah.
seems like something that doesn't need to be software controlled. It will turn off their users and they'll go buy Volkswagens or Porsches or something instead.
Yeah, and to be fair, like the software industry and the hardware industry, they test stuff out all the time, and they test sentiment to see how people
Mm-hmm.
feel or respond, or what are the price elasticity on certain things all the time, right? And if BMW backtracked on this and just said, "Oh, okay, well, it's only going to be these features or whatever it is," this story would be long gone. Like everyone would be
Yeah,
fine with it. You know what I mean? Because people test stuff out all the time and then backtrack or change or adapt or whatever. Where I think this could get a little funky is if all the car companies started doing this and they all went down the wrong path and started really angering or irritating consumers, because once you do that, then you start seeing the secondary shops where, oh, we can hack the software system, as long as you're okay with voiding your warranty, come in and we'll
yeah.
get this little computer and plug it in, and that, what I mean? It's just gonna go down that rabbit hole.
Or they just start gravitating towards different brands. So we see this all the time where it'll be something like, Honda is putting this out, and there's an upcharge if you have an Acura, but not if you own a Honda. So people, instead of buying the Acura, they'll buy the Honda.
Yeah.
So that I think is something they could implement, and then it will what will tend to happen is that they will backtrack. We saw this even with Apple recently, who is notorious for never ever admitting that they've done anything wrong, removing the touch bar and re-implementing ports on the latest implementations of the
Yep.
MacBook. So that's something that hopefully they'll do. This whole thing kind of reminds me of back when they were announcing I think it was the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4.
Uh-huh.
You were required to have an internet connection in order to play games. Like, you could
Yeah.
not play games offline. So if your internet was out, then too bad, you can't play video games. And that also had an like a connotation of like, hey, we're going to be watching you and seeing what you're doing. So there was a huge backlash, and I think it's one of the reasons why that generation of Xbox had issues as far as sales, and they walked it back and went the other direction. I think this is one of the things that we'll see from BMW, especially, or at least for heated seats and heating steering wheels and stuff.
Yeah. Hey, final question before we wrap up. Are you excited about any potential vehicles coming out down the line? Anything you've been waiting for? Anything you're looking forward to?
Well, I do think my next vehicle needs to be an EV. I'm really thinking about that.
Yeah.
Like, the gas has become an issue. It feels as though there was a time frame in which gas prices spiked, and everybody started turning to EVs and Teslas, or EVs and hybrids and stuff, and that motivated the fuel companies to lower their prices. Now it feels like an extinction burst, where it's just like, we know that EVs are replacing gas driven vehicles. Gas driven vehicles will be vintage and luxury only in the future.
Yeah.
So we're just going to hike up the prices as much as we can and make as much as we possibly can before, this is our last gasp in order to make money out of things before everybody switches over to electric. So that's one of the things I'm looking at. Then beyond that, it's obviously autonomous vehicles, autonomous driving, that will increase safety, make things easier. If I want to take a road trip somewhere, it's so much easier and faster.
Yeah.
And
So which vehicle are you looking at though? Like if you were going to buy one tomorrow, which one seems to be the one that you are most interested in right now?
well, I haven't been researching, but I did like I believe it's a Lexus RXF,
Hmm.
R,
Yep.
R, RSF. So it's a two-seater coupe that's kind of more sporty and stuff. I don't have kids, so I don't have to worry about something like that.
Hmm.
And it looks like an awesome car. It looks like it's fun to drive. And I've had a great experience with my Lexus, especially coming from a BMW. My car was in the shop all the time.
Yep.
And now my car is never in the shop. And it's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. I was thinking about the Volkswagen Buzz. Have you seen that?
I haven't. What is it?
That's the new bus. So they're basically
Oh.
bringing back the Volkswagen Bus, but it's electric.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like all windows and it's like super awesome. It's really cool. It's very beachy kind of. It's really interesting. It just looks like it'd be really fun to drive, and it'd be
Mm-hmm.
really fun to like take down to the beach and take a nap in the back and that kind of stuff. So I'm really interested to see how that goes because VW sells these Vanagons, and you've seen those with the pop
Mm-hmm.
tops and stuff. And they make these absolutely beautiful modern Vanagons, but they're not sold in the USA. So one
Mm-hmm.
of them is even called the Big Sur. It's based off of
Interesting.
California driving.
Yeah.
It really is, right? Going down Highway 1 and being in Big Sur, but they don't sell them here. So the Buzz will be sold here. So I've heard a lot of people say they were really interested in trying it out, and a couple people I know are like, "Dude, I'm going to totally buy one when I have a chance. I think it'd be a really fun vehicle." So I'd like to see. I'd like to see that unfold, but I think it got pushed back again. I think it's going to be a couple
Uh,
years before we see it now.
I'll have to take a look at that. I did have one other question for you before we sign off. Your parents recently got one of those adventure vans,
Yes,
and you've gotten a chance to play around with it. I think you guys even went on a camping trip where you got to kind of
we
check it
did.
out.
Yeah.
What can you see with the next generation of vehicle design, software getting more involved as far as an evolution in kind of the adventure van design?
So the thing about the adventure van that is really like just amazing is that they've been doing this for forever. I mean, people have been making adventure vans for a long time, but now that
Hmm.
their partnerships are happening between companies like Winnebago, so the one that they got is the Winnebago Solis, and
Hmm.
Solis is basically partnered with Dodge Ram, and they're using the Dodge Ram 2023 model vehicle, and then they're doing all the Winnebago updates into it. The thing that's really cool is like you could pretty much do anything from boondocking all the way to just hanging out at the beach. It has all the power you need. It has which is run off of lithium batteries. And then you have solar to charge those batteries. And then if that goes out, then you have a generator that's actually underneath the vehicle, which is rated
Hmm.
for national parks. And you can turn the generator on, which uses gas in order to power the air conditioning and all the stuff that's in the vehicle. And it's got the big display like Teslas do in the front. So it's got all kinds of cool software features. I could definitely see these vehicles having these over the air performance updates and being able to say like, oh, okay, we can now, increase your battery capacity by another 10% because of this, new software feature. Or,
Hmm.
you know, you could literally do almost anything you want with these vehicles. They are coming out with electric versions of them, which I think
Hmm.
is going to be super cool. But they're always going to have the boondocking generator built into it and stuff like that. Because if the vehicle does have issues and you don't have the time to charge it with the solar panels or things like that, or the additional solar panels that come with it, you need to be able to flick a switch, have some gasoline in it, and be able to get yourself somewhere, or to at least turn on your air conditioning and your plugs and your power and that kind of stuff. So they're amazing. I mean, I am blown away on how beautiful it is inside, how fun it is. You could park it in a normal parking spot, so it's not
Hmm.
super long. Just shocking. I think the next generation is going to be software updates for energy conservation and also safety and security. And what I mean by that is like the ability to send a message if something's happening. Maybe someone's trying to break into your van while you're sleeping somewhere, or you're stuck and you need help, and they can instantly find someone local and create a network of people that they can reach out to in all the states and cities and stuff, so that if something happens, someone can come out and give you a hand.
Hmm.
There's a lot there, dude. There's a lot. It's amazing. I highly
That's
recommend
awesome.
it, and I think you should buy one. I
Well,
do.
I definitely think that is one of the futures of vehicles is recreational vehicles. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunities in that space.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend it more. I mean, it's so much fun. It really changed like how I think about camping as well too, because like I always go and just pitch a tent, and then we have an adventurous weekend and do things and stuff. But to be able to just like open the van door, walk in and wash your hands, and then prep stuff on prep food inside, or lay down and just take a nap in the middle of the afternoon and stuff, it just adds this extra level of relaxation, especially when you're doing like, just normal camping, nothing too
Yeah.
crazy, right? And the fact that eventually they're going to get to the point where they're electric. I mean, it's not going to
Hmm.
cost you anything to drive these things everywhere.
Yeah, and it really opens the door to hitting multiple locations instead of just going to one place, pitching your tent there, and then going home.
Yeah, and actually, that's exactly what my parents are doing. They're doing a Highway One trip next week, and they're going to be going to one beach community to the next beach community and goofing off for 3 or 4 days and really kind of
Oh
pushing
yeah.
it to the limits and stuff. And they're super excited about it. And so, yeah, they're great. We could do like a whole episode just on these things, because they really are the future. I mean, everywhere I go, I mean, I don't know if people are aware of this, but like even being in the Bay Area where everyone's working in tech and they're busy and they're like, on calls all day long and stuff. There are so many adventure vans now around.
Hmm.
I mean, we have three in our neighborhood that are
Yeah.
parked in front of people's houses. Like they're becoming normal, because if you can't afford to buy a house right now, you can get one of these amazing vehicles and give yourself a really awesome adventure for like 100K.
Yeah.
Brand new.
And the reality is, it's super hard to go camping in the Bay Area.
Oh yeah.
Even though there's so many places to go camping, but it's so popular that it's hard to get in. It's like trying to get into a rock concert. It's the lines are insane.
Yeah, and what they have now, just as a quick side note, and then we'll wrap up here because I know it's not related to autonomous vehicles and microtransactions. But they have this service called Harvest Host, which
Hmm.
basically all of these different wineries and farms and vineyards, people just allow you to come in and park your vehicle there and crash for one night. Just one night. They all they
Yeah.
ask is that when you're part of the service, you show them your pass that you're part of Harvest Host, so they have your name and phone number and information. And then if they sell something there, like wine or something like that, be respectful and buy a glass of wine or a bottle of wine or a sandwich or something like that, just to kind of contribute to the community. But you could
Hmm.
just basically stop at these places and stay the night, and you don't have to worry about having a campsite.
You know what that makes me think?
What's that?
That is a tremendous opportunity for a company like BMW to sell as a software subscription service that is not unlocking some piece of hardware that's installed on their
Th-
car.
there you go. That's
Yeah.
there's so many options that are
Yeah.
going to emerge even when you think you came up with all those different options, and you start seeing things like this and you go, oh, look at this community that I can build where these BMW enthusiasts can support one another,
Yeah.
right?
So listen up, BMW. Think outside the box. Think about the whole experience. There's a lot of opportunities out there that doesn't involve charging for something that was free for a long period of time.
I agree. All right, everyone. Thank you again for listening to us. We really appreciate it. As we always say, we'll be posting these links and many of the sources that we referenced on Twitter. So you can find us and follow us on Twitter at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast and the number one at the end. If you like this podcast, you found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. Thank you again, and we will see you all next week.